She took her sister's place in an arranged marriage. The lonely cowboy swore she was his forever. Emily hadn't planned for this. The sudden turn of events that led her to step into her older sister Sarah's place for an arranged marriage had caught her off guard. It wasn't the life Emily had imagined for herself. She had dreams of finding love on her own terms, but here she was, standing in a quiet, almost empty room, waiting to meet a man she had never seen before. This wasn't just any meeting. This was the beginning of a life that had been chosen for her sister, by their parents. The tradition was simple, almost old-fashioned: marry someone who could offer a future, security, and a place in the community. But Emily's heart was not in it. She didn't want to be a part of some calculated plan. The idea of love being something arranged, something expected, felt distant to her. Still, she had no choice. Sarah had fallen ill the day before the meeting, a fever that left her too weak to attend. Their parents insisted Emily take her place. She had no objections, of course. Family meant everything, and she would never refuse to help. But what if she didn't belong in this life? What if this wasn't her path? She had so many questions running through her mind, but no answers. As she stood in the doorway, Emily could hear the faint sound of boots echoing on the wooden floor. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped inside. The man waiting for her was a cowboy. That much she knew. A tall man with a strong build, dressed in worn jeans and a faded shirt, standing by the window with his back turned. His rugged look suggested someone who spent their days working the land, someone who wasn't accustomed to being around crowds or idle chatter. He was alone, and by the look of him, he was used to it. She hesitated, unsure of how to begin. This was all so strange. The silence in the room stretched between them, awkward and heavy. Finally, the cowboy turned around. "Emily?" he asked in a deep, rough voice. She nodded, a bit taken aback by his directness. The way he looked at her made her feel as though he were searching for something deeper than the simple courtesy she had offered. His eyes, dark and steady, didn't seem to hold the usual warmth she had imagined when thinking about meeting someone new. Instead, they were guarded, distant, as if his heart had long been closed off from the world. "I'm Jack," he said simply, his tone giving nothing away. It was the first time she saw him fully, standing there in front of her as if waiting for her to speak first. Emily forced herself to look past his rough exterior, the strong jawline, the calloused hands. There was something else beneath it, a quiet pain that she couldn't quite place. Jack took a step forward, breaking the silence. "I suppose we should get this over with," he said, almost to himself. Emily felt a pang in her chest. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, like this was some form of duty for him, like he didn't want to be here either. But she knew it wasn't his fault. He was just as much a part of this arrangement as she was. "I'm sorry about your sister," Jack added, his voice softening just slightly. "It wasn't my choice either." Emily's heart fluttered at the hint of empathy in his voice. Maybe he wasn't completely as closed off as he seemed. Perhaps, like her, he was simply going along with the flow, a situation he had no control over. She glanced around the room, trying to distract herself from the awkwardness. The room was simple, with only a few pieces of furniture. A worn wooden table, some chairs, a few old pictures on the wall. It wasn't much, but it felt real. Genuine in a way that was hard to explain. Emily wasn't sure what kind of home she expected, but something about the simplicity of the place made her feel like she was in the right spot, even if everything about the situation felt wrong. The sound of the wind howling outside made the room feel even quieter. Emily shifted her weight from one foot to the other, uncertain what to say next. Jack didn't seem to be in any rush, just standing there, looking at her, his posture tense but calm. "I'm not sure what you were expecting," Emily said after a moment, feeling a little braver now that the silence between them was starting to feel less uncomfortable. "But I'm here. And I'm sorry for this. For everything." Jack looked at her, his gaze softer now, more understanding. It wasn't quite warmth, but it was something more than indifference. "It's not your fault," he said. "This is the way things are around here. I'm sure you didn't ask for it, but neither did I." Emily nodded, feeling a strange kind of relief. The weight of the silence wasn't as heavy now. Maybe it was the way he spoke so honestly, or maybe it was just the fact that she wasn't the only one feeling out of place. Either way, Emily realized that there was something about this moment, this meeting, that wasn't as bad as she had imagined, but still, it wasn't exactly what she had hoped for. She had dreamed of meeting someone who would make her heart race, someone who would look at her and see more than just an arrangement. Emily didn't want a life that felt like an obligation. She wanted passion, love, the kind of connection that went beyond duty. But in this room, standing in front of a man who seemed just as lost as she couldn't help but wonder if maybe this was where she was meant to be. She didn't want to settle, but maybe, just maybe, life had a different plan for her. As Jack shifted slightly, the moment hung in the air, the tension easing just a bit. There was no rush. Emily felt as if the world outside could wait, and for the first time since entering the room, she allowed herself to look at Jack without the fear of what would happen next. Maybe, just maybe, there was something about him that she could understand, something about this place that could make her feel like she belonged. Jack took a step toward her then, breaking her thoughts, and spoke again, but this time his voice was different, softer. "Let's sit down," he said, gesturing to the chairs. "We've got a lot to talk about, and I'm sure you'd like to know more about what this arrangement means." Emily hesitated but nodded, stepping forward. The unknown lay ahead, but maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something that neither of them could have predicted. Days passed since that first awkward meeting, and Emily found herself adjusting to a life she never imagined. At first, everything felt strange. Walking into Jack's world, a world that seemed as far removed from the life she'd known as possible. The ranch was a vast stretch of land, with fields that seemed to go on forever and the constant hum of nature all around her. The smell of fresh hay, the sounds of animals, and the open sky above, it was all so different from the bustling town and familiar streets she had left behind. Emily wasn't sure what she expected from Jack. He had been distant and reserved during their first encounter, but as the days went by, she began to see a different side of him. He wasn't unkind, but he was also not someone who wore his emotions on his sleeve. He worked hard, his days filled with tasks that required his full attention, leaving little room for anything else. But when the work was done, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a soft pink, he would sit down beside her, and for a moment there was peace. Jack wasn't much of a talker, but there was something about his presence that made Emily feel at ease. His silence wasn't cold or harsh, but rather, it felt like a quiet strength, something solid and unmovable. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized how deeply rooted he was in his own world, a world of hard work, self-reliance, and a certain kind of loneliness that had become a part of him. It was clear that Jack had never truly opened himself up to anyone. There were no friends visiting the ranch, no family gatherings, nothing to show that he had ever let someone close. It made sense, Emily thought. Someone who worked alone in the fields for so many years would get used to solitude. Yet there was a part of her that wanted to break through that barrier, to see the man behind the cowboy. But it wasn't easy. She had her own struggles, of course. The guilt of taking her sister's place weighed heavily on her heart. Sarah, her older sister, was still recovering from her illness, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had somehow stolen something from her. Their parents had been insistent that Emily step in for Sarah, but Emily knew that this wasn't the life Sarah had chosen. It wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to Jack either. He had agreed to this marriage, but for all the wrong reasons. He hadn't known her, hadn't wanted her, and yet here they were, bound by a contract neither of them had asked for. Still, every day brought something new, something unexpected. She couldn't deny the way Jack's presence made her feel, calm even in the midst of all the uncertainty. He had a quiet way of moving through the world, of dealing with everything that came his way without complaint. Emily admired that about him, even as she struggled with her own emotions. One afternoon, as they worked together to mend a broken fence, Jack spoke for the first time in hours. It was a simple comment, but it felt like a breakthrough. "You're getting better at this," he said, glancing over at her as she tightened a wire. Emily smiled, a little surprised by his words. "I'm trying. It's harder than I thought, but I'm getting there." Jack nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're doing fine, better than I expected, actually." The compliment, though small, meant more to Emily than she let on. It was the first time Jack had acknowledged her efforts without the distance that usually surrounded him. It was as though, in that moment, he was seeing her, not as a stranger, not as a replacement, but as someone who was becoming part of his world in her own way. As the days passed, Emily's feelings for Jack began to change. She wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere between the long days spent working together, the quiet dinners they shared, and the moments where their paths crossed in the stillness of the evening, something had shifted. She no longer saw him as just a man she was bound to by duty. She saw him as someone who was worthy of her trust, someone who deserved more than just a life of silence and solitude. Jack, for his part, seemed to be wrestling with his own feelings. He was still quiet, still reserved, but there was a subtle change in the way he looked at her. It wasn't pity. It wasn't obligation. It was something else, something softer. It was as though he was beginning to see her not as a stand-in for someone else, but as someone who could share in the life he had built, someone who might even fit into it. But neither of them spoke of it. There was no confession, no grand declaration. Instead, they let the silence settle between them, letting it speak louder than any words could. One evening, after they had finished eating, Jack stood and walked toward the porch, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. Emily watched him, wondering what was going on in his mind. He had a way of carrying himself, of moving through the world that made it hard to understand what he was truly thinking. But there were moments, brief moments, when she could see the man behind the cowboy, the man who had a past, who had dreams, who had suffered losses. Emily joined him on the porch, standing beside him, her eyes following the outline of the hills in the distance. The sky was darkening, the stars beginning to twinkle above them. It was peaceful here, in a way she hadn't expected. The ranch, the land, the quiet, it all seemed to have a kind of magic to it. A magic that was slowly working its way into her heart. "You don't talk much, do you?" she asked, her voice breaking the stillness. Jack chuckled softly, the sound rich and warm. "I guess not." Emily smiled, turning her head to meet his gaze. "You don't have to. But sometimes I wonder what's going on in that head of yours." Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood there, looking out at the horizon, lost in thought. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice quiet. "There's not much to say," he said. "My life's simple. I work. I keep to myself. That's all I've ever known." Emily nodded, sensing the weight of his words. "And that's enough?" Jack looked at her then, his eyes serious. "It's enough for me." "Or it was until recently." She wasn't sure if he meant it the way it sounded, but the way he said it made her wonder. "Until recently?" she asked, a hint of curiosity in her voice. Jack's gaze softened, and for the first time he seemed to be looking at her with something more than just indifference. "You've made things different?" "I didn't expect that." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how to respond to that, didn't know what to say, but there in the quiet of the evening, standing next to him on the porch, she felt something stirring in her chest. Something more than just the awkwardness of their situation, something that felt like the beginning of something new, something real. But the moment passed, and Jack turned away, heading back into the house. Emily stood there for a moment, the words hanging in the air between them, unsure of what it all meant. She followed him inside, her thoughts racing. The connection between them was undeniable, but where would it lead? And more importantly, what would happen when the truth finally came to light? The truth about Sarah, about the life they had both agreed to live, and the future that seemed to be waiting for both of them. The days grew longer, and Emily found herself getting more and more accustomed to life on the ranch. She spent her mornings helping Jack with the animals, feeding the horses and checking the fences. The work was hard but satisfying. There was something comforting about the routine of it all. But the discomfort of her situation never fully left her mind. Emily had started to feel like she was living in a world that wasn't hers, a world where she didn't belong. She couldn't ignore the guilt that gnawed at her every day, the guilt of taking her sister's place in this arranged marriage. Every time she saw Sarah, even as her sister recovered, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had somehow betrayed her. Her sister had been the one to be married to Jack, not her. But now Emily found herself stuck in a life she hadn't chosen, and the longer she stayed, the harder it became to leave. The tension between Emily and Jack was growing too. They spent their days working side by side, but neither of them spoke much about the awkwardness of their situation. They were two people who had been thrust together by circumstances neither of them had asked for, and while they both respected the silence between them, it was also beginning to wear on them both. The connection that had started to grow between them wasn't something they could ignore anymore, but neither of them seemed willing to face it. One afternoon, as Emily was feeding the chickens, Jack approached her, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by something more serious. "Emily," he started, his voice a little rougher than usual. "We need to talk." Emily's heart skipped a beat. The seriousness in his tone made her nervous. She stopped what she was doing and turned to face him, her hands still gripping the feed bucket. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Jack hesitated, looking at her as though he were trying to decide what to say next. "About us," he said finally. "About what we're doing here." This arrangement!" Emily felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. This was the conversation she had been avoiding, the one she wasn't sure she was ready to have. She had been so caught up in the daily routine, in the work, in the way the days blended together, that she hadn't truly considered what it would mean to confront the truth of the situation. But now it seemed inevitable. "I know this isn't what either of us expected," Jack continued, his voice low. "I didn't ask for this. And I know you didn't either. But it's getting harder to ignore, Emily. The way things are between us." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what he was saying, but she wasn't sure how to respond. "I don't know what you want me to say, Jack," she admitted. "I didn't ask for this life either, but I'm here now, and I don't know what to do about it." Jack looked down at the ground for a moment, his jaw tightening. "I didn't expect to feel the way I do about you, but I can't help it." "You've been here, helping, working with me, and—" He trailed off as though searching for the right words. Emily could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she couldn't find the words either. There was so much she wanted to say, but it all felt tangled in her mind. The truth, the guilt, the confusion. It all mixed together in a way that made it hard to see clearly. She had started to care for Jack in ways she hadn't expected. But the guilt over her sister, the role she was supposed to play in this marriage, made it hard to know if she had the right to feel anything for him at all. "Jack, I don't know what to do," she said quietly, her voice trembling just a little. "I'm here because of an arrangement." "Because my sister couldn't be. But you, what do you want from me?" "Do you want this marriage? Do you want me?" Jack stepped closer, his expression softening. "I didn't think I'd ever want anything again. Not after the way things had been." "But then you came here, and I can't ignore it anymore. I'm not sure what this is, but I know I don't want to just walk away from it." The honesty in his words hit her like a wave. She felt a mix of emotions, fear, confusion, but also something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there could be something real here. But at the same time, the guilt that had been building inside her felt like a weight she couldn't shake off. "I don't know how to move forward," Emily whispered. "I don't know how to make sense of all of this." "What about Sarah? What about what we're supposed to be doing?" Jack's expression faltered, but he reached out and gently took her hand. "We can't change what's been done, what's been set in motion. But we can choose what happens next. We don't have to be trapped by our past, Emily. We can make our own future together." His words, though filled with sincerity, felt like a promise she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was a way out of the confusion, a way to make things right. But the reality of the situation weighed heavily on her heart. Could she really let go of her guilt? Could she really embrace a life with Jack, knowing that it had all started because of an arrangement that wasn't hers? "I don't know if I can," Emily said, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't know if I can live with myself knowing that I've taken my sister's place." that I've come to care for you when I shouldn't." Jack squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with understanding. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm not asking you to pretend like everything is fine. But I want you to know that you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to carry the weight of it all by yourself. I'm here, Emily, and I'll be here no matter what you decide." The sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at her, made her heart ache. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she could fully let go of the guilt, of the obligation she felt to her sister and her family. But for the first time since arriving at the ranch, she felt like she had a choice to step into something new, to take a chance on something real. There would be questions, there would be doubts, and there would be consequences. Yet in that moment, standing in the warm afternoon sun, with Jack's hand holding hers, Emily felt a spark of hope. Maybe they could make it work. Maybe they could find a way to build something together. And maybe, just maybe, this life wasn't as impossible as it seemed. The days after their conversation were filled with uncertainty. Emily couldn't stop thinking about what Jack had said. The weight of his words stayed with her, lingering in her mind as she went about her daily tasks. She had always been someone who'd tried to avoid confrontation, to keep things simple and smooth. But now she was facing something much bigger than she had ever anticipated. Jack had opened up to her in a way she hadn't expected, and his honesty had cracked open something inside her. It was as if the walls she had built around her heart were slowly crumbling, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for that. But the more time she spent with him, the harder it became to ignore the connection between them. The way Jack would glance at her when he thought she wasn't looking, the quiet moments when they would share the same space without saying a word, it all added up to something more than just an arrangement. Emily could feel it, deep down. She wasn't just here because of her sister's illness. She was here because something was growing between them. Something real and undeniable. Yet every time she felt herself getting closer to Jack, the guilt would creep in. She would think about Sarah and the life she had imagined for her sister. Emily had always been the one to step in, to take on responsibilities that weren't hers, but this felt different. The stakes were higher now. The feelings she had for Jack weren't something she could ignore, but the thought of betraying her sister, of living a life that wasn't truly hers, was a constant shadow over her heart. One evening, after a long day of work on the ranch, Emily sat on the porch, staring out at the fields. The sun had just set, painting the sky in soft pinks and purples. The evening air was cool and refreshing, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside her. She heard Jack's footsteps behind her, and without looking up, she knew he was there. She didn't need to see him to know that something was different in the way he moved, in the way he held himself. "Mind if I sit?" Jack asked softly, his voice almost hesitant. Emily nodded, her hands resting in her lap. She didn't trust herself to speak. Not when her thoughts were so tangled. Not when everything inside her felt like it was on the verge of falling apart. Jack sat down beside her just a few inches away, but the space between them felt vast. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the gentle rustle of the leaves in the trees. Finally, Jack spoke again, his voice low and steady. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About how things aren't as simple as they seem. And you're right. They aren't." He paused, turning to look at her. "But Emily, you don't have to carry all of this by yourself. I'm here, whether you want me to be or not. I can't change the past, but I can be here for whatever comes next." His words hit her like a wave. She felt the sincerity in them, the raw honesty that she had come to expect from him. She turned her head to look at him, meeting his gaze for the first time in days. There was something in his eyes that made her heart ache, a tenderness, a vulnerability that she hadn't seen before. It was as if he was opening up to her, allowing her to see the man beneath the cowboy. "I don't know if I can do this, Jack," Emily said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can be the person you want me to be, the person you need me to be." "What about Sarah? What about everything we've been taught? The way things are supposed to go?" Jack's expression softened, and he reached out, gently touching her hand. You don't have to be anyone but yourself. You don't have to carry the weight of your sister's dreams or your family's expectations. I'm not asking you to be someone else, Emily. I'm asking you to be with me, to let me be here for you." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and she blinked them back quickly. She wasn't sure why she was crying, why the weight of his words was hitting her so hard. Maybe it was the relief of knowing that someone understood her pain, that someone saw her for who she was, not who she was supposed to be. Maybe it was the fear of letting go of the life she had known and stepping into something unknown, something that could break her heart. "I'm scared, Jack," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of what this means, what it means for me, for Sarah, for everything I thought I knew." Jack didn't say anything at first. He simply sat there beside her, his presence solid and comforting. He didn't try to fix her fears, didn't try to tell her everything would be okay. He just sat with her in the quiet, as if telling her that she didn't have to have all the answers right now. That it was okay to be unsure, to be afraid. After a long moment, Jack spoke again, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I can't promise you that things will be easy. I can't promise you that we'll have all the answers right away. But I can promise you that I'll be here, and I won't let you go through this alone." Emily looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in a long while, and in that moment she realized something. She realized that she didn't have to have everything figured out. She didn't have to have a perfect plan. All she needed was to take one step at a time, to trust that she wasn't alone in this. "I don't know what comes next, Jack," Emily said, her voice stronger now. "But I want to find out. I want to try. I want to see where this goes. With you." Jack smiled then, a smile that reached his eyes, lighting up his face in a way Emily had never seen before. "Then we'll figure it out together. One step at a time." Emily felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from having all the answers. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from knowing everything was perfect. But it was a peace that came from knowing that she wasn't alone. She had Jack by her side, and that was enough for now. As the night deepened and the stars began to twinkle above them, Emily leaned her head against Jack's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence. The world around them seemed to fade away as they sat together in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts, but together in a way that felt right. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have the life she had always dreamed of. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be perfect.
But it would be real, and that was all that mattered.
As the days turned into weeks, Emily found herself growing more comfortable in her new life. The ranch, once a foreign place, had become a second home. She had learned to enjoy the work, the rhythm of the days, and the quiet beauty of the land. Jack's presence, once something that felt so uncertain, had become a steady comfort, a constant in her life. But the deeper they grew into this new life together, the more complicated things became. Emily still carried the weight of her past decisions, the guilt of stepping into her sister's place, the confusion about where her heart truly lay. She had begun to question if this was what she truly wanted, or if it was simply the path that had been set before her. But with each passing day, she realized that sometimes the path you find yourself on is the one that leads you to the most unexpected places. Jack was still a man of few words, but the bond between them was undeniable. They didn't need to say much to understand each other anymore. The way they would work side by side, the quiet moments they shared on the porch in the evenings, it was enough. Emily began to see a side of Jack she hadn't seen before, one that was full of tenderness, care, and a deep sense of loyalty. His quiet strength was something she had come to admire, and slowly it made her realize just how much she had come to care for him. One afternoon, Emily found herself standing in front of the house, her hands on her hips as she surveyed the horizon. She had been thinking a lot about the future, about what lay ahead for her and Jack. The uncertainty still lingered, but now it felt less like a weight and more like a challenge she was ready to face with him by her side. Jack walked up behind her, his boots making a soft sound on the dirt path. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, looking out at the land they had worked so hard to care for. There was something peaceful about this moment, something that made Emily feel like everything was falling into place. "You've been quiet lately," Jack said after a moment, his voice gentle. "I can see you're thinking about something." Emily smiled softly, glancing at him. "I've been thinking about a lot of things, Jack. About us, about where we're going. I don't want to be stuck in the past, but sometimes it's hard to let go of it." "I understand. We can't change the past, but we can choose what we do with the present. And the future. We have a chance to build something here, something that's ours. Not because we're supposed to, but because we want to." Emily felt a surge of emotion at his words. She had spent so much time trying to please others, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers. But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could finally choose her own path. She didn't have to live for anyone else's expectations. She could live for herself, and for the man standing beside her. "I'm not sure what the future holds," Emily said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. "But I'm ready to find out. With you." Jack's gaze softened, and he reached for her hand, his grip strong and sure. "I don't have all the answers either, Emily. But as long as we're together, we'll figure it out." The words hung in the air between them. And for a moment, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something beautiful. Something real. As the days passed, Emily and Jack's bond deepened. They worked together on the ranch, facing the challenges that came with it, but there was something different now. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken promise that no matter what came their way, they would face it together. The silence that once felt so awkward now felt comfortable, like a shared language that only the two of them understood. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day of work, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. The stars were beginning to twinkle in the sky, and the night was calm and still. Jack sat beside her, his presence as steady as ever, and Emily felt the weight of her past begin to lift. She wasn't who she had been when she first arrived here. She had changed, grown, and learned that love didn't always come in the way she expected. It didn't have to be grand or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet and simple, found in the shared moments of everyday life. "Do you ever think about the future?" Emily asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Jack looked at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Every day. But mostly, I think about what we can do today. We can't control what's coming, but we can make sure that today counts." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. She had spent so much time worrying about the future, about what would happen next, but Jack was right. All they had was the present, and in this moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be, with him. "Then let's make today count," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. Jack's smile widened, and he reached over, taking her hand in his. "We already are." From that moment on, everything felt different. There was no more hesitation, no more guilt weighing her down. Emily had found her place in the world, not because it was what others had planned for her, but because it was what she had chosen. With Jack, she had found something real, something that didn't need to be explained or justified. It was simply the way it was meant to be. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and moments of uncertainty. But Emily knew that with Jack by her side, she could face anything. They had built something strong together, and no matter what the future held, they would face it together, one step at a time. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the land. Emily leaned against Jack, feeling his steady presence beside her. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to relax, to enjoy the moment. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready for whatever came next. And with Jack, she was no longer alone.